Eleanor Bennet stood by the window of her small Sussex cottage, watching the rain fall softly onto the garden. The house felt strangely quiet without James. Her son had left for London a week ago to begin his new job as a marketing manager. The familiar sounds of his laughter and footsteps were gone, replaced by an echoing silence that seemed to stretch endlessly. At 45, Eleanor had never imagined feeling this alone. She spent her days tidying the rooms James once filled with life and memories. Yet, as she gazed at the empty chair in the kitchen, she realized something deep inside her was stirring. It was a feeling she could not name, a mix of loss and, strangely, hope. That afternoon, Eleanor decided to take a walk through the village. The grey skies mirrored her mood, but she welcomed the fresh air. Passing by familiar faces, she smiled weakly and received kind nods. The community seemed unchanged, bustling as always, but for Eleanor, everything had shifted. When she returned home, her eyes caught a small wooden box tucked away on a dusty shelf in the garden shed. Inside were packets of seeds, gifts from her late mother. A sudden warmth spread through Eleanor's chest. Maybe this was the sign she needed. A chance to plant something new, not just in the soil, but within herself. The following morning, Eleanor woke earlier than usual. The idea of planting the seeds from her mother's box filled her with a quiet determination. She brewed a pot of tea and sat by the kitchen table, spreading the small packets carefully before her. Each one carried a promise: bright marigolds, delicate lavender, cheerful daisies. They were not just flowers, Eleanor thought, but symbols of life's persistence. Her hands trembled slightly as she gathered the necessary tools: a trowel, some soil, and empty pots she found in the garden shed. The garden was a neglected patch of earth at the back of her cottage, tangled with weeds and overgrown shrubs. But to Eleanor, it was a blank canvas, waiting to be brought back to life. Outside, the drizzle had stopped and a soft light filtered through the clouds. She knelt down, pressing the seeds gently into the soil, whispering words of encouragement as if the plants could hear her hopes. The work was slow, methodical, and for the first time in weeks, Eleanor felt her mind clear. Days turned into weeks. Each morning, she checked her garden, watering the soil with careful attention. Gradually, green shoots began to emerge, fragile but determined. The garden was transforming, much like Eleanor herself. The loneliness she had felt began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of purpose. Word of Eleanor's garden soon spread throughout the village. Neighbors started stopping by, curious and eager to help. An elderly gentleman brought her old gardening books, while a young mother offered homemade jam for the tea she served on her porch. Eleanor found herself at the heart of a small but lively community. One afternoon, as she arranged freshly picked flowers in a vase, Eleanor realized her days were no longer empty. The garden had become more than a project, it was a sanctuary, a place where friendships blossomed alongside the flowers. The pain of her son's absence remained, but it was now balanced by the joy she was creating. In planting those seeds, Eleanor was cultivating a new chapter in her life. She was learning that growth often comes from loss, and that hope can flourish in the most unexpected places. As spring deepened, Eleanor's garden blossomed into a riot of colors and scents. The once neglected patch had become a vibrant tapestry of life, attracting bees, butterflies, and even the occasional curious robin. But the garden was more than just a beautiful sight, it was a symbol of Eleanor's new beginnings. Every morning, she took a moment to sit on the wooden bench she had placed beneath a blossoming apple tree. It was there that memories of James flooded her thoughts. She remembered his childhood laughter echoing through the garden, his small hands eager to help plant seeds just like she was doing now. Yet, amidst those memories was a quiet acceptance. Eleanor understood that her son's path was different from hers. He was building his life in the bustling streets of London, chasing dreams she had once held for herself too. And though their lives had diverged, love remained the constant thread binding them. One afternoon, Eleanor received a letter from James. His words were warm, filled with gratitude for the home he left behind and excitement about his future. He spoke of long days at work, new friendships, and the thrill of city life. But most importantly, he assured her that despite the distance, he was thinking of her often. The letter touched Eleanor deeply. It reminded her that love is not confined by miles or time. It also sparked a new determination within her, to build a life that would make her proud, with or without her son by her side. Inspired by this resolve, Eleanor began planning small events in her garden. Tea parties for neighbors, weekend markets featuring local crafts, and workshops on gardening and flower arranging. The cottage became a hub of creativity and connection. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Eleanor stood in her garden and looked around. The flowers swayed gently in the breeze, and laughter echoed from the porch where guests gathered. She felt a sense of peace she had not known in months. The garden was no longer just a place to grow plants, it was a home for her spirit. The village of Ashford was a quiet place, known mostly for its rolling countryside and close-knit community. Yet, through Eleanor's little garden gatherings, the sense of isolation that once lingered among its residents began to dissipate. One chilly morning, as Eleanor was arranging a bouquet of freshly picked daisies, a knock came at her door. Standing there was a woman about Eleanor's age, carrying a wicker basket filled with home-baked scones and a shy smile. "I'm Margaret," the woman introduced herself. "I live just down the lane. I've heard about your garden, and I wondered if I might join one of your tea parties." Eleanor welcomed her in, delighted by the unexpected company. They spent the afternoon sharing stories, Margaret's memories of raising her own children, her late husband's love for fishing, and the small joys she found in knitting and painting. Margaret was not the only new friend Eleanor made. Over the weeks, others came forward, an artist who painted landscapes, a retired teacher who taught local history, and a young couple who ran the village bakery. Each brought something unique to the growing community. The garden parties blossomed into a regular event, held every weekend under the shade of the apple tree. Neighbors would bring homemade cakes, jars of jam, or a new plant to add to the garden. Children ran laughing through the flowers, while the adults chatted over steaming cups of tea. Eleanor felt a warmth she hadn't known since James left. These new friendships were a balm for her heart. They were proof that life, even after loss, could be rich with connection. Yet beneath the laughter and joy, Eleanor still carried a quiet ache. Sometimes, late at night, she would find herself staring at an empty chair, longing for the son who had left for London. But then she would remember the garden, the roots she was planting not only in the soil but also in her own heart. As spring slowly gave way to summer, Eleanor understood that her journey was far from over. With every new friend, every shared cup of tea, and every blossom in her garden, she was weaving a tapestry of life that was uniquely her own. The days in Ashford were longer now. Sunlight lingered late into the evening, and the garden seemed to hum with life, roses climbing higher, lavender brushing against the pathway, bees darting through the air like notes in a song. Eleanor moved among the blooms with quiet pride, her hands dirt-smudged and heart a little lighter each day. Then one morning, a letter arrived. It was tucked among the usual post, council notices, a gardening catalogue, a handwritten envelope she didn't recognize. Eleanor held it for a moment, sensing something familiar in the way her name was written. Neat, angled, deliberate. She opened it slowly. "Dear Mum," it began. Her breath caught. "I've been meaning to write for some time now. Work's been hectic, no excuse, I know. But I wanted to tell you something I couldn't quite put into words over the phone." Eleanor sat down at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in her hands. "I've been thinking about you. About home. About the garden and the way the kitchen always smelled like cinnamon on Sundays. London is fast. It never stops. Some days I love it, and some days I just feel lost in it. I met someone, her name's Lydia. She's kind, funny, and she reminds me a bit of you. We talk about you, sometimes. She says I light up when I do. Eleanor smiled gently, eyes misting. I miss you, Mum. I didn't know how much until I realized how long it's been since I sat at your kitchen table or heard you hum while pruning the roses. I'm sorry if I've made you feel like you're not part of my life anymore. That was never my intention. I'll be coming to Kent next month. Lydia would love to meet you. I was hoping, maybe you'd let me help in the garden again. Eleanor read the letter again. Then once more. Each word stitched into her like the sun warming soil. Her son hadn't forgotten her. He hadn't replaced her. He was simply finding his way. She placed the letter on the table and walked outside, letting the summer wind wrap around her shoulders. The garden stood vibrant before her, a testament to everything she had rebuilt. Next month, James would walk through the gate he once ran through as a boy. And she would be there, arms open, heart ready. But until then, Eleanor knew she wasn't just waiting. She was living. The sky above Ashford was painted in soft pastels. A breeze moved through the trees, brushing the tips of the hedgerows and making the lavender tremble. Eleanor stood by the kitchen window, wiping her hands on a linen cloth as she stared at the gate. Her heart had been thumping since dawn. Today was the day. She had made lemon drizzle cake. The scent floated through the house, mixing with fresh tea leaves and wild roses. Everything was ready. The garden, so carefully tended, now seemed to hum in quiet anticipation. Then, the latch clicked. Eleanor held her breath. The gate opened. And there he was, James. Taller, perhaps, than she remembered, with lines of fatigue beneath his eyes. But he smiled in that familiar, crooked way that made her throat tighten. Beside him stood Lydia, a young woman with kind eyes and dark curls pulled into a loose bun. Hi, Mum, James said softly. It had been years since he'd said those words in person. Eleanor didn't speak. She simply walked forward, wrapped her arms around him, and held him close. No speeches, no questions. Just the silence of forgiveness passed between them like a secret language. Then she turned to Lydia. You must be starving. Come inside. They talked over tea and cake, laughter threading itself between cautious words. Lydia asked about the flowers, about Eleanor's favorite seasons, about how the community came together to help her when she first opened the tea garden. Eleanor noticed the way James looked at Lydia, his gaze filled with quiet admiration. But later that afternoon, as the sun shifted lower in the sky, the two of them wandered into the garden. Eleanor watched them from the French doors, heart full yet cautious. James crouched by the rosemary bush. I used to hate weeding this bit, he said. You still do, Eleanor replied, stepping outside. They shared a smile. I'm sorry, James said. His voice wasn't much louder than the wind. For leaving like I did. For not calling. For making you feel like you didn't matter. Eleanor sat on the bench beside him. You did what you had to. You found your life. And I found mine. James nodded, a slow, grateful gesture. There were times, she continued, when I thought I'd never stop missing you. But I realized something. You gave me a chance to become more than a mother. You gave me back myself. Tears welled in James's eyes. I'm proud of you, Mum. Eleanor laughed, brushing a hand over his cheek like she used to when he was small. And I'm proud of you. Even when you forgot the weeding. They sat there as the garden buzzed around them, the past folding into the present without resistance. By evening, when Lydia helped Eleanor light candles along the path, the garden glowed like something sacred. A small table was set for three beneath the old willow tree, where stories were shared and second chances accepted without condition. Ashford had once been quiet. Now, it sang. Summer faded into early autumn. The leaves in Ashford turned copper and amber, falling in soft spirals over the garden paths. Eleanor's tea garden remained open through the changing seasons, now adorned with blankets on chairs and cinnamon sticks in the teapots. Locals still came, but something was different now. Eleanor wasn't just a kind hostess, she was a name they said with warmth, someone who had become a quiet pillar of the village. James and Lydia began to visit more often. They brought new faces, friends from London charmed by the simplicity of Ashford. Lydia even offered to help Eleanor set up a website for the tea garden, capturing its charm in photographs and soft piano music. One Saturday, Eleanor sat under the pergola with her old friend, Marjorie. They watched children play by the lavender beds and sipped tea in silence for a while. "You're not waiting anymore, are you?" Marjorie asked gently. Eleanor turned to her. "No. I think I'm simply living." Marjorie nodded, satisfied. "Took you long enough." They both laughed. Later that day, Eleanor found James helping in the kitchen, a tea towel flung over his shoulder, sleeves rolled up as he prepared trays of scones. He didn't notice her watching at first. "You know," she said, stepping closer, "you've got the Whitmore kneading technique all wrong." James turned, grinning. "Blasphemy. I've improved it." He dusted flour on her nose. She retaliated with a flick of dough. Laughter echoed off the old stone walls. Then Lydia entered with a tray of mismatched cups. "I've just received 3 booking requests for next Saturday. Apparently, someone's been writing about us online." Eleanor raised her eyebrows. "Us?" "Well, mostly you," Lydia smiled. "They say your garden is where broken hearts come to bloom again." That evening, as twilight painted the hills in lavender and dusk settled in, Eleanor walked through the garden alone. She touched the ivy that clung to the walls, the rosemary she had once planted in grief, now thriving. She thought of her past, the silent mornings, the letters that were never sent, the ache of waiting. And she thought of now, of this life that didn't ask for permission to begin again, that gently arrived the moment she stopped resisting. Eleanor paused by the gate. It was open. A breeze stirred the air. This place, Ashford, hadn't just been where she ended up. It was a place that chose her. And she had accepted. The arrival of autumn brought a quiet dignity to Ashford. The mornings were crisp, with mist curling over the fields and the first frost settling lightly on the grass. Eleanor's tea garden thrived in this new season, filled with the scent of cinnamon, apple, and warm bread. Her little shop was no longer just a business, it was a beacon of hope and comfort. Eleanor had begun to teach afternoon tea classes, sharing her recipes and stories. Locals and visitors alike gathered around wooden tables, hands wrapped around steaming cups, faces glowing with newfound friendship. Edward called more often now. His voice was lighter, and his tone gentler. He shared stories from London, the rush of the city, the hectic meetings, the late nights. But beneath it all, Eleanor sensed a growing admiration for the life she had carved out in Kent. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of gold, Edward arrived unexpectedly at the tea garden. His eyes searched for her among the blooming chrysanthemums and fading roses. "Mother," he said softly, "I wanted to see it for myself. This place you've made." Eleanor smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "Welcome home, Edward." He looked around, the corners of his mouth lifting in a shy smile. "It's more than I imagined. I was wrong to think London was all there was." She reached out, squeezing his hand gently. "Sometimes, we need to step away to see where we truly belong." That evening, as the village settled into its gentle rhythm and lanterns flickered on, Eleanor sat on the porch with a cup of tea. She watched the stars emerge, one by one, threading the sky with silver. Her journey had not been what she expected. It was better. In the quiet of Kent, beneath the autumn skies, Eleanor had found her new beginning.